Welcome to You Got Moxie, the podcast about the how of change making. I'm your host, Julianne Crommett, and today we're so excited to have Dr. Katherine Peiper and Dr. Stacy Smith from the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative at USC's Annenberg School of Communications. They're going to dive deep into the evolving landscape of representation in media, from gender and race to LGBTQ+ and disability inclusion. They share pivotal moments that sparked their passion for change. Listen as they explore the challenges, small steps, and fresh perspectives driving transformation in the entertainment industry. We cannot wait to welcome Dr. Katherine Peiper and Dr. Stacy Smith. Welcome, Kate and Stacy, to You Got Moxie. We're so excited to have you both here.
It's great to be here, Julianne.
Very exciting.
Wonderful. It's also good to see you all. It's been too long.
Way too long. Has it been? We haven't seen you since this whole thing started, right? The pandemic?
I think I saw you in person once to come to your class,
yes.
I believe.
That's right.
Yeah. I think that's the last time I saw you was when I came to guest lecture at your class last year.
Yes, last fall.
That must have been it. Yeah, it's been a while.
Last fall. Oh my gosh. So really, we're at a year later here, everybody who's listening at home. This is wild. So you're getting us reunited. Yeah. And with that, Stacy and Kate, you all do remarkable work when it comes to the research space. You sit in academia as well. So I'm looking out at our academia friends who might be listening in. And I'd love it if you could each share a little bit about yourselves and about your work together. And then in that, maybe highlight a moment where you knew change needed to happen. Positive change needed to happen. And what was that moment like and what went through your mind then? So I'll hand it over to you all.
Their stories go.
No, you can go first, and I'll answer the change one. Well, the change question.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're arguing about who goes first, everybody. This is great.
Because I hitched my wagon to what Stacy was doing. So it doesn't feel fair to go first because I think I'm like the back of the train here.
Well, okay. Essentially, I founded the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative several years ago, and we're a think tank looking at gender, race, ethnicity, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities, mental health portrayals, all within the framework of on-screen, on-stage, behind the camera, in the recording studio. So it's really a 360-degree look at inclusion with the groups that we just mentioned, but we're always interested and open to doing more work and thinking critically about groups that aren't in that span that was just articulated. And it's really about documenting both how frequently people are getting access and opportunity, as well as the types of access and opportunity, because not all access is equal, as we know. And Kate is the director of the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative. So I'll pass that. We've been doing this a very long time.
Yes. I started working with Stacy, who was a professor, like my very first day of college.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean about the hitch.
What?
Thing.
I didn't know that.
Years ago.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm like, your story is first because you were already in it.
Yeah, true.
To some extent. And I just showed up, fresh-faced, encountering the world for the first time. No clue.
But did your thesis on gender differences in smiling in yearbooks?
Yes.
So it was a foreshadowing of our work on gender, before, because we come out of a very different tradition of media effects research, primarily negative effects, things like violence or, portrayals in the news and the consequences to that of society and young people in particular. So Kate, though, had some
early work
on gender. Yeah, absolutely.
16 years old, combing through yearbooks.
Yeah.
It's a good time.
Yeah. Anyway, we digress.
Way into history.
Yeah, we're off track.
We went to yearbooks. Yeah. We're in a whole other.
Which is to say, now we look at fictional characters primarily, though we do some work in the documentary space and online media space and all of that as well. But I think it's been a real adventure. It's an exciting space to work in. It's not always the most heartening space. I think there's a lot that still needs to change. And I think one thing that I learned from working with Stacy, right, and I think you're very good at this, is, and have been for some time, is that numbers tell a story. And Stacy's very good at using those numbers to tell a story. And I think for me, there was a moment where the numbers then became actual people, and we started to do some interview-based work on women directors. And I ended up conducting a lot of interviews and hearing women talk about how difficult it was. And the numbers that we've been collecting, or that you've been collecting at that point, really came to life as there's an impediment here that's more than just a low percentage. It's actually people's lives, it's people's careers, it's what they want to do, how they want to express themselves. How do we help people understand, which again, you've been good at from the beginning, but it took a while to catch up, to understand that that's the consequence of the numbers not moving. It's the actual people.
That's right. And was there a moment, for you, Stacy, you were saying that there seemed to be a definitive, what was that moment where you realized something needed to change, that there was a real turning point for you, if you will?
Well, I think a couple of different things have happened, and I'll just provide two really good examples. I know when I first started doing this work with the now Gina Davis Institute for Gender and Media, but at the time it was called CJane, it was really my dean who said to me, you need to look at movies, because Gina was just interested in TV. And I thought that was an incredible note, and particularly G-rated films and animated films. And what we found with that first study of 100 films, we found that there was a ratio of males to females about 3-1. And that was in the content that most young people grow up with, right? The animated hits that, we can all just kind of rattle off. And I made a list after that study of all the empirical questions and research I wanted to conduct, because I couldn't believe how bad it was for girls and women, first and foremost. And second, it was the defining value of our undergraduate students. They cared about identity, and in droves, they came wanting to work on this research with us. And so that was way back in 2004, 2005, Julianne. And as we kind of progressed through this podcast, coming back to that early research is something that's always very top of mind, even with our latest investigation. And then how do we think about change?
No, and I think what's really profound is that you had a note that was given to you by somebody else that caused and incited the question of further interrogation. And it's interesting, several of our guests have made a note like that, actually, that it was somebody asking a question, whether it was themselves or somebody else asking them that question, that it incited the moment, really. And it was the ability to hear it and not reject it outright that was a pivotal experience.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really interesting you say you kind of keep coming back to it and make it part of your journey, which actually really leads to the next question, which is, thinking about our audience at home, and we've asked every guest this thus far, is, it can feel overwhelming when you see a data point like that, right? When you think about, you made a list of questions, right, that you wanted to interrogate from there. Where do you start? How do you think about where to start? Because I think about myself or anybody who might be listening, and you go, oh man, that's a lot. And so from that moment, how did you think about the next steps, or like where to begin, and what advice do you have for people who might feel a little overwhelmed by looking at certain data points, right? Or having an experience?
I think that's a great question. And so, it really helps being an academic, because we live by a syllabus, at least, 2 terms of the year. And if there's a summer term, then 3. And that syllabus is a really good thought exercise of what's your plan? What's your way forward? What needs to be read? What needs to be accomplished? How do you evaluate that people are understanding what you're teaching and what they're reading? And so for me, it's often, what is the very next step that needs to happen? And so for that project with animation, it was, who's working behind the camera? Who is, right? It's a little different than a live action movie, but who is calling the shots? Who's drawing, right? Who's writing? How is that writing process different than live action? Who is working in all the various within house roles to make that story come to life? And then creating a list of what do we need to think about to do this in a way that's consistent and has validity And it really, quite frankly, Julianne, led to the major project that we did with you, and maybe that we released in 2019, but I think we started sometime around 2017. The largest study that's ever been done on animation in the history of social science research with WIA. And you were a board member, and you were an executive at the time. So it's really just thinking about not the whole picture, but and that's how we get to change too. You have to be incredibly specific. You have to know the audience. You have to navigate for people exactly how to get there. And research, I don't think, is any different. You have to know what is the very next question that helps unpack this problem that you're studying. And if you look at it like laying bricks, or, one word at a time in building a story or a narrative, or just, exercising one day, not every single day, so that then you get up the next day and you do then strength exercises or more aerobic work or whatever the case, one step at a time. And so that's how I've always approached research. Though sometimes it doesn't feel like that because it feels accelerated, like we're doing everything really, really fast.
Right.
In my mind, it's always one step at a time.
Absolutely. And echoes, by the way, a few other folks that we've had on, specifically that one step at a time, or doing the thing that's sort of right in front of you first.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious, I think about the build of your research, the advantage of having collaborated with you for a long time. And I think also, Kate, about you coming from essentially having been a student of Stacy's into the Institute and thinking about building. So Kate, for you, what was, that moment of thinking, okay, what's that next step? Right. And what was the thing for you that was maybe an inciting incident or something that really sparked? I'm thinking, you started at the yearbook photos and then you had this, the first round of research with Gina Davis. And then you asked, you had Willow ask you the question, what about movies? Right. And it all went from there. And so my question is, like, Kate, what for you, like when you entered the Institute's work, was a tip off and has led you down a route of thinking or a next step, if you will?
Well, I think all you have to understand too is I left at the start. So I worked on that G-rated film study, and then I left and I worked for a relief and development agency abroad for a while, international. So I was kind of moored in exile, we like to call it, overseas, doing something completely different. And then I came back and the initiative existed, right? So I stepped into something that had been built and had to figure out, okay, well, how do I fit here? Do I fit here? Do I want to fit here? And I think in general, you might disagree, I find I'm a pretty curious person, and there was always a new question that we were asking. Yeah. There was something else to understand or build on or think about. And that led to then doing a lot of reading. We were joking about this a couple months ago, we used to read a lot more. There was a lot of reading, right? A lot of trying to see what was going on in the literature, really trying to attack what other scholars were doing. And as we've gotten busier and busier and grown and had more things, the reading time has become smaller and smaller. And I kind of miss it because we got into this game to learn, right? That's, I think, what many academics do. Yeah. They want to answer some question or learn about some problem, and they focus so specifically on one thing. And our one thing that happens to be very, very broad. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot to keep learning about. And so for me, I think every time we do something new, it's a chance to learn about that thing. Or even every new study is, how are we going to present this differently? Or how are we going to think about this differently? Or even the study that we're finishing up right now, it's, we've done it before
17 times.
17 times. You did most of it, but what's the new thing? How do we tell people once again, right, if you're not doing so great?
Yeah.
Right. So I think for me, that's been the thing, is there's always more to be curious about and to try to understand. And that's what's kept me interested and engaged.
Absolutely. And I think something inherent in what you said too is that as you go down this path of, change making in some way, whatever it might be, you may find you actually have some less time than you used to do that curiosity or that thinking. And so I'm curious, have you all figured out some best practices for yourself of like, how do you guard some time to continue that curiosity outside of like the actual work itself? Like, is there a methodology you applied even to your own, life or time that might be useful to our listeners, especially as they're thinking, oh gosh, maybe I'm in the middle of it and I felt like I lost some of that aspect of sort of why I started in the first place, and how to reconnect with that?
Well, I know that something that is really helpful is that we have a staff of about 16. Kate and I are the outliers in terms of age. And what they're curious about, their sensibilities and what they bring to the office, that fuels the fire of starting to wonder and ponder and imagine questions that we haven't asked. Like, we want to step into sports because people on our team are really interested in sports, right?
Yep.
Anime, people on our team are very interested in the topic, right?
Yep.
And so I think one of the things, though, that keeps us very nimble and excited and engaged is that our day job is helping people have a growth mindset and introducing them to the ways in which their mind may or may not be serving them, and how to navigate the social environment so that people aren't experiencing exclusion to the same level they have in the past. And so we spend a lot of time with Gen Z, which it brings up so many amazing questions and interests and ways to think about interfacing with the world that to me is just really exciting. Like, it's hilarious to me that Hollywood doesn't get it. And they're just day after day. Yes. All they would have to do is go to their local community college, their local university, their local church, their local synagogue, their local
any place.
Hang out with young people, and they'll understand. I mean, what did they say? The Fall Guy, Furiosa. Seen those stories before. I know those people. I know that, right? But they talk about Saltburn. They talk about Bottoms, right? Whole different sensibility. And so I think for us, it keeps there's a youthfulness, there's an interest, there's a surprise, and it makes it really easy to go, Brad, what's that? Like, that's interesting. Explain that to me, right? Do we need to do that on our social media? Like, what should we do? And we're constantly growing. And that, I think, makes it really exciting.
And I think the flip side is when you do know something that they don't know, you have to think, well, how do I know that?
Right.
Why do I know that?
Yeah.
Why have I always thought that was the case?
Right. How do I justify it?
Find the evidence, like, oh, I did know that, I was right about that. That did happen that way, or whatever.
Right.
It's real, it's true, I didn't make it up, or I'm not misremembering it or something. Yeah. And then also you can question, well, why is that the case, right? Why do we do that, right? Yeah. Why is that the way it's done? So I think it's a both that keeps you.
I mean, I just watched that today. I get an email from all of the Olympians that are from USC. Like, these are the people that we just hang out with in our classrooms all the time. Like, we started lecturing on research, and a guy literally took out his notebook, started writing out a mathematical equation about how to do what we do, though, from a computer science and engineering perspective. Yeah. And I mean, you never know who's in your class.
That's right.
And their perspective. And so it keeps it really exciting and humbling. Very, very humbling.
Absolutely. And it's also like this sort of idea that in change work, like, also to stay humble in it. I think that it is a constant, like, if you feel like you've solved it, you haven't. That's sort of the, like, you guaranteed. And I think because, we march a long path of people who came before us and people who come after us. And that's kind of like the whole point of it in a way. And I love you're sort of illustrating that continuum concept, something that keeps coming up as well in even what you're saying with your students, right? And they keep picking up the baton and they take it even further, right? And then you're, as Kate, as you're saying, you're even interrogating things you assumed because of it. Well, and I love this because it gets us right into this question also of what happens, and you already started to allude to it, which is what happens when you meet conflict in the work, right? So, i.e., you're laughing. I know you're already laughing at this question. I knew when I asked it of you, which is, you're on the road and it's like you're hitting a wall. You're hitting a brick wall, or maybe even at every turn. How have you all thought about and met that either conflict or obstacle, and use maybe a specific example to illustrate, so folks at home can also think about if they're running into challenges, how might they think about it as well, whether that be a people, system, organization, whatever it might be.
Well, I know one thing that happened quite a bit, maybe in the aughts, people, it was so interesting. We're doing this really great work. At least I thought it was great. Maybe, I'm more enthusiastic about it. Maybe it wasn't so great, but that neither here nor there.
I'm going to say it's great.
Yeah, neither here nor there. But, we would not get invited to present our own work, or we wouldn't get invited to be in the room where things happen. And it was because I was largely stereotyped as a researcher. And I do not believe that any industry can change itself. There's no compelling evidence for me with the industry that we work so closely with. 17 years, the percentage of girls and women on screen, Julianne, hasn't changed. I mean, that means all of the activism has failed. All of the efforts internally has failed. All of the work like we've done, it hasn't had an impact. And so, but to then be stereotyped and reduced to, you're not one of us. You don't know how to change. And I'm like, wow, this is really interesting that these folks think that they know how to come up with an answer, because nobody's calling on the world leaders in gender, race, ethnicity, LGBT. Like, people aren't calling on the folks that actually know how to change things. They're looking to one another. And then they would, ensure that we didn't participate because we're stereotyped as researchers. And so, and I hear it all the time, right? We both hear it all the time. Well, your research and this and that and the other. I'm like, well, I think that my contributions have been more towards solutions than anything else. I mean, the research is kind of mind-numbing, but it's the solutions that are really the imaginative ways in which you can, catalyze change. And so that to me was an interesting challenge of, I can now identify even more with the people that we're studying, because they're constantly being stereotyped. They're not being trusted. They're being sidelined. Their credibility is being questioned. And I'm like, I can really relate to this now in ways that I couldn't have previous to working on this type of research. That's an example. I don't know if you can think of another example, but
I think just more general, like Stacy said, there's a lot of solutions that she's developed that come out of our work, whether it's, to just add 5, female speaking characters, or whether it's, becoming a 4% challenge, or the inclusion writer, right? Whatever it might be. There's a lot of times they'll put something out and they'll say like, well, that won't work. Like, or that's not you can't do that. Right. Yeah. And I think some of it is just like looking objectively at the situation and going, well, no, clearly you can't do that.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
That's our retort for the episode. Well, clearly you can't do that.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean the thing can't be done.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I think you've been very good, Stacy, and I think collectively we have tried to get to the people that can do the thing. Yeah. Whatever it might be, in order to avoid hearing well, that's not how it works, or that'll never happen, or it's impossible. Because I think the hallmark of the initiative, and the phrase we probably use almost more than any other phrase, is there has to be a way.
There has to be a way.
And so what is the way? And if it's not the way through that person, then get out of the way or find a different way around that person.
For example, if you were to simply take the top 100 films next year and add 5 speaking characters that were girls and women, set a new norm, and do that for 4 years in a row, you would be at equality in 4 years for the first time. And it's never happened before. Never. Matter of fact, this year, 2023, because we're always about, 9 months behind, 2023, we've taken a backward step. We're at 2010. It was so not the year of the woman. It was so not the year of Taylor Swift, Beyonce, and Barbie. Yes, it was all those things for those specific people. but having a spillover effect to anybody else, absolutely not. And so the fact that you could say 5 characters, less than $5,000, could be filled with anything, anyone from any background, as long as they're identifying as a girl, a woman, a non-binary character. And it doesn't take jobs away from white men. Like, this is a win-win, just on screen to get us to equality. And the fact that it can't be embraced, because that's how things are, things aren't done, that way. Or you have casting directors saying, it's really hard to find somebody. And I'm like, to say he went that way, that's hard? Like, no. That's not one word or more, right? But these are the roles that build people's careers. Everybody has to start with 5 lines or less. And so it's for us a real interesting, I think, push and pull of, you have really tangible, concrete solutions that there's a lack of ability to get involved and say, we're really going to do things differently, and we're going to follow. Instead, it's like, let's create a program, or let's, mentor these people. And that's called make work. It's not actual work or access and accessibility and opportunity for people. So sometimes things are very exciting, very thrilling, because people say yes and they do things like our proof of concept program. But in other respects, sometimes it's a real downer.
Yeah. Actually, I can think of all the people who are like, no. And every time you're like, well, get me to the person who can.
Yeah. Yep. Get out of the way. Yeah. Let us keep going.
Absolutely.
Like right now, we're in an amazing moment for the country. Like a month ago, it was dire. Today, but here's the thing, Julianne. I mean, how many biracial, multiracial, multi-ethnic people do you see on screen in Hollywood, right? If the industry would have listened to us back in Obama's administration, it wouldn't be so hard for Harris, right? Like all the stuff that she's already encountered or will encounter. Where are all those roles on screen? We need every group presented, because it decreases the likelihood that people can get away with the dehumanizing language that can lead towards aggression and interpersonal violence in ways that are horrific. So there's a lot to be done quickly, particularly as we see rising and present star and Harris. The media should have been there years ago, because it would have made her path, front runner, trailblazer, would have made it easier. And it's just a really good example of the industry could have done this. And again, we have to, I don't want to be patient. I want to be, how do we get it done?
Well, no, absolutely. And I think, something that I think is also really, powerful in what you said is that I don't think everybody always connects the dots. It's very obvious for us who do narrative change work a lot, but not everybody connects the dots between what happens in on-screen realities and what happens in off-screen realities. And the absence or presence of different types of people, different storylines, we know empirically has influence on our off-screen realities. And you're seeing that, full force right now with Kamala Harris's, Vice President Harris's run, and some of the things, already being said in the media and have been said in the media, throughout, this new campaign and the DEI hire things, all of those things, right? And as somebody who is technically multiracial, I completely agree. And I think this is, and multicultural. And honestly, it's the state of the world, which is the other part that feels illogical. And I think what's also really powerful about what you said, it's the magnet that's on my fridge. I've referenced it in another episode as well, which is those who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those doing it. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the reality of the entertainment business, is there's a dying business model and people holding on for dear life. This is my interpretation. And I think that without new models and new places being built by people who keep this at the forefront and understand the market value in it, and it may be outside the United States, if we're being honest, we're not going to see that fast change unless it's with new structures. And I've come to that point, personally, but I think it speaks to the empirical evidence that you've all been looking at as well. And, I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I want to reflect on one question that I ask everybody, which is that, this stuff is hard. It's hard. You all expressed how hard it was just now. And so my question for each of you is, how do you keep going? Where do you find your day-to-day energy? And how do you recharge, especially when the days can be really hard or on those days that are particularly frustrating?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it's who do I listen to? I don't spend a lot of time listening to folks in the industry about what they think may or may not work, their evaluation of our work, the choices that they're making. So for me, I kind of have a buffer in that, I spend a lot of time in the morning, whether it's walking or in my own kind of space of meditation. Like, I'm very much a faith-based person, and that is where I draw all my strength from. It's the only reason I'm doing this. I believe that the world should be a better place, and unless people take up the mantle and go and bring as many people with them in the process, that to me is the meaning of a fulfilling and thrilling and exciting life. And so that part with undergrads and in a space that we've really created, and USC really leaves us alone to do the work that we do with our team and our students, but it's really listening to that inner voice and not letting the space of all, because the inclusion space is really negative, not allowing that to really affect you. I have seen my students go on to do amazing things. And I mean, one of them, it runs all social media for Jennifer Lopez. I mean, he worked with you in the past, actually, Julianne. Another works for another works, for Getty Images. She's at the top of the hierarchy, right? You see them hold on to these issues and take it and multiply, and that's the business that we're in. But on a daily basis, how am I renewing my mind? What am I focusing on? What am I meditating on that's not this? What kind of ancient texts? What books am I reading? It's about how am I transforming my mind to not accept and be overwhelmed by what I don't see, but focus on the reality that can be when people embrace really understanding that every single human has value. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about every single person is important. And how do we help people really care about other people? And I think that's what our work is at the end of the day. And trying to focus on that rather than some of the hits, some of the awful things that people say and do. But instead focusing on our students are going to change the world, right? That's why we're in this, right? And
yep,
that's my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, there's lots of ways to be rejected, but oftentimes the rejection isn't about you personally, especially for this work. I don't think it's.
Well, sometimes it
is, but it doesn't. I don't think there's a lot of times when I walk away at the end of the day going, "Oh, this person said no because of me."
Yeah.
Right. Maybe I wasn't persuasive enough, but it's not about me as a person. They're not rejecting me. There's a lot of, we spend our days understanding all the reasons why people will not act in ways that advance inclusion, right? Like there's a lot of psychological reasons that have nothing to do with Stacy Smith or Pieper or something, right? Like that just, they're just not going to do it for all those reasons. And so that makes it, I think, a little easier not to say, well, it's about me, right?
Yeah.
And then I think in addition to everything you said, which I think is fantastic, I think, just being part of communities of people who understand the work that you do and value it, but don't see you as only that.
Yeah.
Right. So friend groups and family members and people who kind of recognize, you bring that to the table, but that's not all that you bring.
Yeah.
You know, you're a person, or you're a whole person. You're not just a person who works on inclusion. And so what are the other, you know, valuable aspects of who you are that you bring to those communities?
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. It's community.
Yes.
It's recentering of mind and spirit, which I thought was really beautiful, Stacy, on your part. And I think also recentering on why you do it in the first place as well. And I love that you centered on your students. I know if we have any teachers and or academics listening, I feel like that is going to resonate very deeply. It resonates with me as somebody who teaches, because that's the whole point, really, is why we're together. And on that note, just thank you both so much for your time, your insights, and just the work you do on a day-to-day basis. I feel blessed every day to know you all.
Oh, thanks, Julianne. Thanks for having us.
Thanks again for joining us for You Got Moxie. Continue to follow us and listen to your favorite episodes at collectivemoxie, MOXIE.com. That's collectivemoxie.com. We're excited to see you next time. Take care.